We are seeing our oceans warming, the sea levels are rising, the corals are bleaching, is one indicator of this. Then I started thinking that maybe in a place where you're used to snow, there is no snow because of the climate crisis. In which case, would Snow White really have that name? And what would happen to Snow Queen? Would she be, what realm is she going to rule over if, there is no snow? So I just started thinking about how these characters are really nature characters, and how the present environmental crisis that we are seeing would impact each of their habitats. So the big bad wolf now no longer lives in the enchanted forest. He lives in the disenchanted forest because his forest has either been cut down or become palm oil plantations. I'm hoping that, and when I write, nature is so central to my stories that readers will respond to it. They will fall a little bit more in love with nature and continue to foster it. They'll go out there, maybe hug and climb a tree, because that means when they grow up, Mohua, they will vote to protect that tree.
Hi, in today's episode, we have with us Bijal Vachharajani, an award-winning author known for her impactful work in environmental education, a really need of the hour. When Bijal is not reading a children's book, she's writing or editing one. She's the author of multiple planet-friendly books called A Cloud Called Pura, Savi and The Memory Keeper, both of which won the Author Award. When Fairyland Lost Its Magic, which won the Kalinga Award, one of India's first climate fiction writers for children, she's a commissioning editor at Pratham Books and a climate warrior. Bijal's award-winning book, When Fairyland Lost Its Magic, takes a creative spin on classic fairy tales where characters like Rapunzel, Snow White, and the big bad wolf face the consequences of climate change in their once magical world. With humor and vivid illustrations by Rajiv AP, Bijal blends fantasy with important environmental themes, offering a fun yet insightful way to engage young readers with the climate crisis. Let's dive in and hear more from Bijal. So the book name is When Fairyland Lost Its Magic. What was that initial spark that made you write this? And through the lens of climate change in fairy tales.
Firstly, Mohua, thank you so much for having me here and putting your spotlight on children's books about the environment. I'm sure this happened to you also. I grew up on fairy tales. And then I ended up going to gardens and I would look for fairies under mushrooms. I would look in tree hollows and look for elves. And then, as I did that and I grew up, and I realized that so many of these books celebrated actually a sort of magic that was really about nature and the denizens that are fairy tale creatures are inspired from them, whether it's Thumbelina, whether it's Hansel and Gretel going into a forest. And over the last few years, we've really seen how bookmakers have retold fairy tales to reflect the times we live in. Especially, there've been some fabulous feminist recasting of these stories. It made me think that our human world has been influenced by these tales, and these tales, like all tales, evolve with our times. And what is the biggest crisis of our times? It's climate change. And so it made me start thinking, how would climate change impact my fairyland beloved characters? And that's really how I wrote When Fairyland Lost Its Magic.
So, this entire idea of fairy tale characters facing climate change is really unique. I mean, hats off to you. So, how did you decide to blend the two worlds of environmental issues, which is quite a serious thing, and fairy tales, which is really for children?
When you think of the word fairy or you think of the word magic, to me, I started thinking about enchanted forests, enchanted seas. First thing I actually did was I made a list of all the fairy tale characters, like the Brother Grimm's ones. And starting to think that where are they situated? Like, well, Little Mermaid is obviously going to be one of the first to be impacted because, we are seeing our oceans warming, the sea levels are rising, the corals are bleaching is one indicator of this. Then I started thinking that maybe in a place where you're used to snow, there is no snow because of the climate crisis. In which case, would Snow White really have that name? And what would happen to Snow Queen? Would she be, what realm is she going to rule over if, there is no snow? And so I just started thinking about how these characters are really nature characters and how the present environmental crisis that we are seeing would impact each of their habitats. So the big bad wolf now no longer lives in the enchanted forest, he lives in the disenchanted forest because his forest has either been cut down or become palm oil plantations. So once I started thinking, the connections just got so much clearer. And before I knew it, I had this whole cast of characters which were just deciding what they wanted to do about the climate crisis.
Your story is filled with characters like you just mentioned. There's Rapunzel, there's Snow White, there's Cinderella, but everything is with a climate twist. So could you tell us a little bit about how you imagined these classic characters, to fit into your narrative?
That's a great question. And when working on this book, I kept thinking about the fact that stories change with time. Like that's what, and we are a country that has always had oral traditions which are passed from one generation to another. And they always change with time, right? Like the location suddenly changes, the character becomes, somebody local. And I started, and I've always loved fairy tales, like pumpkins turning into carriages. I mean, kaddu, which is a vegetable. So it's celebrating the power of imagination and all sorts of possibilities. But I started thinking that, like I said, for instance, one of my favorite is actually Sleeping Beauty. I suffer from a fair bit of insomnia. And as a person who writes about the climate crisis for children, a lot of adults come and talk to me about climate anxiety. I was like, Sleeping Beauty is so not falling asleep because she's constantly going to be climate anxious. And Mama, when I do these sessions with children, I start with Rapunzel's tale, and we talk about how, if you have long hair and you can't wash it because of water crisis, what would happen? If you open the window and there's smog outside, immediately all the children say, "Oh, you mean like Delhi?" And I don't even have to make the connection. The children are making these connections with their characters, rethinking what's happening to them with the climate crisis, and coming back with so much more.
So, a big bad wolf is not bad in your story. So, tell us a little bit about that.
I think a lot of our stories in like our older stories and fairy tales especially always put animals in a bad light, and I couldn't understand why, because we also have all of these, Asli as a fox, and it made me think that to me the hero was always going to be an animal, because I think even now when we look at what's happening in the world, we have become like, there are people who are becoming the voices for the animals, who are the ones who are suffering, usually from the climate crisis. And being wolf is called Big Bad Wolf. Poor guy, all he's doing is following his nature of being a wolf, and he's still getting a bad rep. While you have Red Riding Hood, who's named after the clothes she wears. So at which point I said, Boss, Wolf is going to be my hero. And he is quite an unlikely hero in many ways. He is very hungry all the time because his prey has vanished. He's got this strange whistling in his ear. And again, I wanted to play with that whole thing where everyone says, "Oh my, what big ears you have," and all of that. And so I said, let me put him in the center of the story and see what happens. And you start to realize that he becomes a voice of pragmatism in many ways, but also somebody who's just like, listen, I can't deal with human beings being the way they are and what they're doing to my world. And so, yeah, he becomes this funny character. And his best friend is Little Mermaid, which you can imagine how hard it is because your best friend is half fish. And as a wolf, you kind of like Europe, you also like fishy food. So he's constantly like, I will not eat her. And that itself shows how strong he is.
Wonderful. What I love is that your princesses in your books are not damsels in distress. They play a very pivotal role, in solving the climate crisis. So how was it important for you? I mean, these are really young kids that we're talking about, of having, very, very proactive, strong female characters, which is fantastic. I mean, it really touched me, but I need to hear it from you.
I'm so glad you think that. And, when I talk to children about the book, they're always like, yeah, I don't need anyone to rescue me. And I think over the last few years, like I was saying, so many people have done this, like in films, in retellings, in stories. In fact, Soumya did this whole book around that long ago in India. Then we have like that book by Kamila Raut and Vandana Bish about the princess with the long hair, which is a really unlikely princess. And I was just thinking that I wanted my characters to mirror the kind of people we see in real life. And I am surrounded by some fabulous women. Well, I'm sure it's the same with you. There are like, they are kick ass. They're the ones who uh, stand up for what they believe is right. They're not waiting for anyone to rescue them. And so, in many ways, these princesses, as I was writing them, became more and more very much women I knew as well in some ways, who wouldn't take no for an answer. And there's a point when all the princesses come together, and I'd wanted it to be a moment of female solidarity as well.
How
Uh,
lovely. How
yeah, and I
lovely,
wanted,
Brazil.
right, because I'm sure you know this, that girlfriends matter so much to all of us in real
Absolutely.
life.
Yeah.
Stories give you that canvas to, challenge stereotypes. And the princesses were the first ones we could start with. And the other thing that I love about Rajiv, when he's illustrated the books, there's this one image of the prince, all the princes are standing together. They're standing at a chai kade, and they're just waiting that there'll be some princess we can rescue, but they're never called. And I think that to me tells everything about.
So you're an environmental, advocate and an author. So how do you think that these stories, when Fairyland lost its magic, can really shape the way that children will start having a conversation about the environment?
Mohua, I've worked with children now for work with and around children for more than 20 years. I uh, have written about children as a journalist. I reviewed children's books. I worked on a school contact program called Kids for Tigers. I read a lot about children and nature. And one of the things that I strongly believe in is that children have this natural affinity for nature, or as my hero, and I think everyone's tired of me saying this, but Rachel Carson called it this inherent sense of wonder about the natural world. Like you show a child a sparrow taking a dust bath, she will be riveted. And how do you entice children to eat? You'll just be like, look, the crows come to the window. Look at the crow open your mouth like he opens his beak, and there you go, you shove a morsel down their throat. And those little nature elements is how children explore the world. For me, squirrels, I grew up in Delhi for a bit, and then I moved to what was then Bombay. So squirrels, gulmohars, and banyan trees in Delhi, and then in Bombay, parakeets and the sea was such a big part of growing up. And yet, research is showing that what we are seeing is that urban children suffer from something called environmental generational amnesia. So their perception of nature inherently gets diminished across every generation. And so I'm hoping that, and when I write, nature is so central to my stories that readers will respond to it. They will fall a little bit more in love with nature and continue to foster it. They'll go out there, maybe hug and climb a tree, because that means when they grow up, they will vote to protect that tree.
How wonderful, Bijal. That really touched my heart. I mean, so important, so important. What was the most challenging part of writing this book, where, you had to find the right balance between fantasy elements and such a serious theme?
So I must say, the first draft was very bare bones in that sense. I put the characters together and I said, go on a quest, broad. Uh, I think what was most challenging in some ways was bringing the whole book together. And also, it was the most wonderful part of it because our publisher HarperCollins really backed the book. Tina Narang, who is the publisher of Harper Children's, was just like, do what you will with it. So we had a whole team of wonderful people working on the book. So there was a lot of conversation about what should the art look like. So Maithili Doshi, who art directed the book, she and Rajiv had discussions about, let's make this the old timey black and white illustrations. And a lot of times, like I felt like maybe I should expand this book, but I also wanted something that's a short novella in that sense. It's not a novel sized book. I wanted to make sure that it's a quick read. And that's always challenging, right? Because you keep thinking, oh, maybe I should tell more. Maybe there's more to be explored here. And I love writing novels. I also write picture books. I'm a picture book editor at my day job. So striking that balance was fairly hard for me as a writer in terms of keeping it to a certain word limit, because I knew this book is for older children, but I also wanted it to be a very quick read like our original fairy tales were for us. So I think that for me was very hard.
It was so, those days, I still remember those wonder years, right? And I remember my fairy tale books used to have cutouts and, it would turn into a book. It would turn
Oh
into a
my
little
God.
cartoon. Yeah, and you would have a
Yes.
squirrel stand up and there would be a duck because they would all be done in cardboard and, painted and done so beautifully. It just lets your imagination go wild. It's amazing. I mean, kudos to you, Vijay, really. So, climate change can really sometimes feel like a very daunting topic, right? So, especially for young readers. So, how do you hope your book empowers children to take action, both in their imagination and real life? Like you mentioned that they're going to go ahead and hug a tree, they're going to, start maybe associating more with nature. What are the other things that you feel that this book would do to their imagination?
Oh, what a great question. And I think this is literally why I write. It's because, there's a part of this book where I talk about about where we upturn the book. Uh, and I talk about how nature is the real magic in our lives. Right? So there's this thing where you see these beautiful fairies, and then you turn the page, and it's the same forest, but it's a forest with owls and other denizens. And and to me, it's always been that when a child reads about uh, nature, I just want them to believe that that is the real magic in our lives. And in that response, I'm hoping that they'll take action in their own little ways to begin with, because it's about everyday actions. I don't want to shift the burden of climate anxiety on them, because let's face it, Mahua, they have tons of homework to do. That should not be happening. But what I want them to be able to think about is just how do you sit and observe a spider spinning her web, and looking at the flight of a raptor circling the sun in the sky, or just walking down a beach and gazing at the little denizens around the tide pools, or like you stand still at a beach and suddenly you realize it's full of hermit crabs. I just want those aha moments, because I think once you've got those, you've got somebody who will look at nature in their everyday decision making, whether they grow up to become a lawyer, whether they grow up to become somebody who is in management. I just hope that this gets them to respond in a way that's always pro environment.
How lovely, Vijay. My God. A big hug to you. I mean, it's amazing because I think it's really the need of the hour, considering the way we grew up and watching children today constantly suffering with so many lung related diseases and coughs and cold in a city like
Exactly.
Delhi, where I too grew up. So, for someone starting, out as a children's, book author, so what do you recommend that kids really begin by reading, which would be the book?
Well, I think you read everything. And I say this with uh, absolute like surety. I have a ridiculous number of bookshelves at my house. But I think one is to just, uh, and I see this a lot, that there are lots of aspiring writers, but it's, and I think you as a fellow author will understand this. You need to research and work towards your craft. uh, you hear all the time people saying, "Oh, I will be a writer." It's not. It's pretty much like if I want to be a banker, I have to. If I want to be a CA, I have to give exams. right? You've
Absolutely.
got to work towards that craft. So research the genre, the format you want to write. Like if you want to write picture books, read picture books and see what's the craft behind having such few words and having that coming together of images and text in that sense. What's a page turn moment? If you're writing nonfiction for children, then read those. Read good books, read even bad books to see what not to do. Um, and above all, just I think go back to the time that when one of the things is that I always find very helpful when writing for children is the fact that we write about everything, but see, if I'm writing a book about space, I've never been an astronaut. But if I'm writing for children, I have been a child. So get back into that shoe of what you were at 10, what you were at 12, and think of those feelings when you were yay small and the world looked this big. And how would you have liked to be treated by the people around you? I think that conversation with your childhood self is very important when writing for children.
So, Bijal, what is it that you would hope both young and old people will take away, from the book When Fairyland Lost Its Magic?
Honestly, I must say, I want when somebody reads a book of mine, I do want them to laugh a lot. So that's humor is a big part of what I do. So one is laugh, and I just want them to have that sense of wonder that I have about the natural world. And I know I sound like a stuck record to everybody about this, but to me, that if they come back with just a renewed sense of belief and hope, I think that's literally all I want. And really, at the end of the day, like I said, if they laugh along with the characters and it makes them think, I've done my job.
Congratulations, Bijal, on your book. And, thank you so much for taking out the time to be on today's episode. And thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Mohua, for having me in my book.